Okay, let's go to the very latest we know about the debt ceiling. As you guys know, McCarthy and Biden had this worked out this deal. I think it's very likely the Democratic side is more or less going to accept it because it is less bad. It is, in my opinion, still bad that they negotiate on this at all, but it is less bad than what I think a lot of Democrats were expecting. Republicans on the other side, not too happy. We did get some comments from President Biden about how he sees this all shaking out. Let's take a listen to a little bit of what he had to say.
Who got the better deal, Democrats or Republicans?
Yes, sir. Bipartisan deal.
Will this get done by June 5th?
Oh, yes.
No question.
Well, you realize you're not in the real world. No question. There is no reason why it shouldn't get done by the 5th. I'm confident that we'll get a vote in both houses, and we'll see. And look, one of the things that I hear some of you guys saying is, why doesn't Biden say what a good deal it is? Why would Biden be saying what a good deal is before the vote? You think that's going to help me get it passed? No. That's why you guys don't bargain very well.
So two pieces there. Number one, June 5th is the new X date that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says that is when the Treasury is likely to run out of money. It's actually amazing. People have crunched the numbers of there are a lot of billionaires in the world right now that actually have more money than in the United States Treasury,
Yes.
which is kind of crazy. So June 5th appears to be the drop dead date. So the reporters are asking, with legislative maneuvering and the 72-hour waiting period, are you going to be able to get it done by June 5th? And he's like, get real. You all don't live in the real world. Of course, we're going to get it done, which is probably true in terms of they can always find shortcuts when they ultimately need to get something through quickly. So that's that piece. The other one, Saagar, I want to get your thoughts on. There's been some discussion of Biden's strategy in all of this, and he's been very sort of non-communicative during this whole process of the negotiations. I was critical of him previously because it led to Republicans really getting the upper hand in terms of messaging, where the public was very divided about who would be to blame if the country did go over that fiscal cliff, which I think is a real loss, given that clearly it was the Republicans who forced this whole crisis situation. But he lays out there very plainly what his strategy is. He's like, it would not be helpful to getting this thing through a Republican House if I were to go out and talk about what a great deal it is. So I'm just going to keep my mouth shut, which, is probably the right strategy.
Yes and no. So it actually requires kind of thinking about it on a strategic level and then on an operational level. So operationally, I think he was correct because he did get a better deal, especially if you compare his deal to President Obama's deals back in 2011. But rhetorically, who won in that fight? Well, we actually have a lot of polling to compare. 10 years ago, President Obama 100% was on the upside of public opinion. Public opinion was like, no, we blame the Republicans.
Yeah.
We are pro with the president. He messaged relentlessly around it, although he did on substance get a worse deal. President Biden, on the other hand, I guess on substance did get a better deal, but rhetorically, if anything, he probably normalized this behavior.
Yes.
And beyond that, let's remember and think about this. He has now set it so that the politics of this are an equal playing field. Now, it may be to his immediate political benefit for his reelection, but in the long run, he might have actually just signed away any real bargaining power that he has in 2 years if he is to be elected. And we shouldn't forget, you can put the shoe on the other foot. I mean, now at this point, what is stopping the Democrats from doing anything like this? They basically did. There was a shutdown.
Because they're wimps. And they never use their power. That's
yes
what
and
stops
no,
them.
but there was
their own reticence to do anything.
But don't forget about the government shutdown. It was a 3-week shutdown under President Trump whenever he wanted to do the border wall funding. President Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi basically stared Trump down in the eyes, and Trump is ultimately the one that buckled. Anyway, my point is that these tactics have now become so normalized, and I think Biden may have had an opportunity to try to get around it, which is ultimately just really weakens the chief executive. So I'm of two minds in terms of what he thinks.
As you know,
Yeah.
I think this whole thing has been a disaster. I think it played it wrong. He played it wrong from the jump. I think the point you made is the most important one outside of the details of this specific deal, which is that it has normalized this type of behavior.
Yeah.
You can take it to the bank that the Republicans are going to do this again in 2 years if Biden is the White House. There is no doubt about it. And there also are real consequences, even with this kind of showdown that, they are, even if they are able to pass the deal, just having this kind of brinksmanship is really damaging to the economy, let alone the very real threat of actually going over the edge and the potential chaos that could be unleashed for that. I mean, in some ways, the fact that the deal doesn't have a whole lot for Republicans, probably the biggest win they got was significant cuts in terms of the IRS budget. But the fact that it was actually things that they, by and large, could have achieved through a normal appropriations process, in a sense that even more normalizes this kind of behavior, because they're willing to throw this tantrum and throw the whole global financial system into turmoil over very, very little. So I definitely agree with you there. On where we are with a potential vote, we've seen hardening opposition from not even like the far right of the Republican Party, but opposition is sort of spreading to more mainstream corners of the Republican Party as well. Put this up on the screen. This was the sort of whip count of the House Freedom Caucus members who, as of yesterday, had come out as in opposition to this deal. And not like, tepid opposition, but quite strident opposition. You've got Dan Bishop, Keith Self, Chip Roy, Ken Buck, Ralph Norman, Bob Good, Matt Rosendale, Andy Biggs, Andrew Clyde, and Lauren Boebert. So that is 10 members who are on the record saying that they will not vote for this thing. Now, by and large, McCarthy can easily afford to lose 10 members because Democrats look like they are going to vote for this in overwhelming numbers. But there are a couple of procedural hurdles that make this a little bit trickier than you might think, because I think there's no doubt at this point they have a majority of members of the House who would vote for it. That seems very, very likely, because all you would actually need is all the Democrats and 5 Republicans. But McCarthy has said, not bringing this to the floor unless I have a majority support within the Republican caucus. He probably has that. It's a little bit of a question mark, so there's that piece. But even more critically, this has to go through, and I mentioned this yesterday, this has to go through the Rules Committee. Okay, this sounds very archaic, but it becomes highly relevant because during the negotiations between McCarthy and the House Freedom Caucus for him to become Speaker, one of the things they demanded is we are going to have some key seats on that Rules Committee because it effectively controls what can come to the floor. So put this up on the screen. This is from Chip Roy, who is on the Rules Committee and who is a House Freedom Caucus member. He says, a reminder that during Speaker negotiations to build the coalition, that it was explicit both that nothing would pass Rules Committee without at least 7 Republican votes and that the committee would not allow reporting out rules without unanimous Republican votes. So he's saying that they made some agreement, which is possible. I don't think we heard about this at the time.
Krystal, I don't think this is true. Because
really? Because, well, remember, so much of this was behind closed doors. It's impossible to know what they actually agreed to.
McCarthy and them have come out, not McCarthy himself, but his allies are like, that's not true. We didn't agree to that. And then Chip Roy was actually pressed about it last night in an interview. And he was like, well, we agreed to a lot of things. It was a handshake deal, and none of it is written down anywhere. I'm like, look, dude, as anybody who's ever done anything in terms of contracts, especially if you're striking a deal with somebody who you don't trust, ostensibly that's these people and McCarthy. If you don't get it in writing, then you didn't have anything. And of course, look, maybe it was dishonorable, but also maybe he didn't say it and he kind of hinted at it and you took it away, something very different, and now you're getting upset and you're coming out in public and saying something which is not written down and which is not confirmed. So anyway, I'm not calling him a liar. I'm just like, maybe they misunderstood.
Could be a miscommunication.
I think it's a miscommunication, 100%.
A sort of theoretical, yes, in principle, there has to be 7 votes, but in reality, now that he needs this done, he's gonna toss that to the side. Washington Post had some reporting about this Rules Committee and the numbers and the way that they break down. You can go ahead and put this up on the screen. They say it's often called the Speaker's Committee because it's made up entirely of appointees from the House Speaker and the Minority Leader. It's tilted in such an extreme way. 9 members of the majority party, just 4 from the minority, that the speakers always get their way here. Traditionally, the 4 members of the minority always vote against whatever the majority wants. Now, that also is not written in stone. It's just sort of like convention for whatever reason, but that also could be changed. But you already have a number of members here from the right who have said they are opposed to the deal. So in all likelihood, it could be Thomas Massie, who is ideologically aligned with the, deficit hawk House Freedom Caucus, but he has been personally relatively loyal to McCarthy. McCarthy also gave him some goodies in this deal, things that he had his own personal preferences in terms of how appropriations worked. I won't get into all the gory details here, but McCarthy specifically mentioned Massey, I think because he knows he is such a key vote. Massey hasn't said 100% which way he will go on the deal, but he posted something on Twitter that indicated he was like, well, doing this kind of deal is one way to get things done. Another way is through the appropriations process, seeming to indicate that he was kind of willing to accept this direction with the idea that he would be able to achieve more through that appropriations process modified to suit his whims and what he has been pushing for. So I think where we are is it's more likely than not that it is going to pass, even as you have sort of hardening Republican opposition. You also have Ron DeSantis coming out and in opposition to the deal as well, which gives you a sense of where the winds are blowing from a grassroots conservative perspective. Let's take a listen to what he has to say.
Well, prior to this deal, Kayleigh, our country was careening towards bankruptcy. And after this deal, our country will still be careening towards bankruptcy. And to say you can do $4 trillion of increases in the next year and a half, I mean, that's a massive amount of spending. I think that we've gotten ourselves on a trajectory here really since March of 2020 with some of the COVID spending. It totally reset the budget, and they're sticking with that. And I think that that's just going to be totally inadequate to get us in a better spot.
So what'd you make of that, Saagar?
Yeah, I mean, look, he's smart because obviously the base is going to be against. The base doesn't. They want to see Biden crushed and fail. They don't care about the substance of it literally at all. This goes all the way back to 2011 politics. This is when the Freedom Caucus guys were all over Fox News, and Boehner actually went to Roger Ailes and pleaded with him. He said, "Please take these guys off the air. You are destroying me." And Roger was like, "Hey, man, that's what the people want." And I mean, he's right. Like, really, what it is that you have an undercurrent of a lot of the Republican base who not interested. They wanted no wins for Obama. They want no wins for President Biden. There's no reason to suspect why the dynamics have changed. Vivek Ramaswamy also put out something against it. Let's put this up there on the screen. He's calling out, quote, other GOP candidates stand on the debt ceiling. Jumping on the anti-woke bandwagon is easy. True. It is harder to take a real stand on the hard stuff, debt deal, bank bailouts, pardoning peaceful Jan 6 protesters, criticizing the Trump indictment, exiting Ukraine. If you can't speak candidly here at home, you're not ready to sit across the table from Xi Jinping. So that's where we're at, right now. We have the Vivek Ramaswamy and Governor DeSantis out against it. Krystal, our show, we waited and held out for a Trump statement, and we have not yet received anything. President Trump has not put out anything about this. Haven't seen Nikki Haley weigh in. Haven't seen Tim Scott weigh in either. Interesting because Scott actually does have to vote on it. He has a vote on it. So that one will be very, very interesting to see which way he decides to go, because that will be an indicator of presidential politics. Overall, I actually thought it was a smart move for DeSantis. I increasingly am viewing him as the Ted Cruz of the race. He is running against Trump from the right, from a true conservative kind of ideological lens. People shouldn't confuse this with political talent because it's not the same thing. Saying his attacks on Trump are very much Cruz-esque. And don't forget this either. Ted Cruz came in second in the GOP primary, won the second most amount of votes, and frankly was probably the single most credible candidate other than Trump in 2016. So it's not a bad play considering how that went down. Also, he did lose though, so it's correct. It's complicated.
Correct. He did lose. Ted Cruz notably also has come out against the deal. So to your point about DeSantis being in the Ted Cruz lane, I think that is true. DeSantis's attacks on Trump have a very 2016 Ted Cruz-esque echo. The other comparison that's been made is like to Elizabeth Warren with the wine track. Like, I got a plan for that kind of vibe. There's a little bit of that going on too. But I think with Trump, you'll recall a little while ago, he was sounding very, tough about the debt ceiling deal. He said, I say to the Republicans out there, congressmen, senators, if they don't give you massive cuts, you're going to have to do a default. And I don't believe they're going to do default because Sorry, an ad popped up because I think the Democrats will absolutely cave because you don't want to have that happen, but it's better than what we're doing right now because we're spending money like drunken sailors. I mean, put aside the fact that this man blew up the deficit like crazy with his friggin' tax cuts for the rich. But, you know, he was sounding really like hawkish on we're willing to go over the cliff and we got to do it and we're spending too much. So it's very notable that now that a deal is struck, not a word from him. And it's not an accident. I mean, he's in this tough political bind because he, better than anyone, has his finger on the pulse of the Republican base. He knows the popular thing to do would be to say, this is a bad deal and we shouldn't accept it and it's a disaster and we're going to, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But he also has backed Kevin McCarthy and, you know, calls him my Kevin and helped him get over the finish line in terms of the speaker's race. So he doesn't necessarily want to go against someone who has turned into a key ally for him and who he is bolstered. So he has calculated that the safest move for him is just to zip it and keep his mouth shut. Uncharacteristic wisdom there from President Trump.
My suspicion is that Trump desperately wants to tweet against it and that McCarthy called him and begged him not to. That if I had to bet money, I bet you that is what has happened.
My expectation as well, because that is the one thing. If Trump came out really strongly against this deal,
could be dead.
Could actually sink it. And it could really put the speaker's gavel on the line for McCarthy as well if he continued to push forward. So, yeah, I think it's a giant gift to Kevin McCarthy and massively increases the likelihood that this deal will get through, that Trump has remained silent, which also shows you the pull that he has with the Republican base and the Republican caucus continuing versus Ron DeSantis, who can come out and say this, and you're still likely to have a bulk of the caucus be like, yeah, but we're going to go along with it. Hey, guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us. And if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.